with patchy rain, a low of -3. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Caroline Rundell.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 3 minutes past 8 is the time on LBC. Welcome to Cross Question, our weekly political panel debate show. You can watch us, of course, on YouTube, on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, and on the Twitter feed and Facebook page. Let me introduce you to our panel for the next hour. Professor Simon Heffer, historian and Telegraph columnist. Polly Toynbee, Guardian columnist and author of The Lost Decade and What Lies Ahead for Britain. I have a copy here if you're watching. Fiona Mactaggart, former Labour MP for Slough, and Steve Brine, current Conservative MP for Winchester, but former Health Minister. So we're ready to take your calls. 0345 6060 973. That's a number to call if you'd like to talk to our panel about any subject in the news this week. But I imagine you can probably guess what one or two questions might be.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Polly, tell us about your book before we start. Might as well give you a little bit of a plug. It's all about austerity. Now, do books on austerity sell?
Well, we shall see. It's not out till tomorrow, so I don't know yet. But it's about the decade 2010 to 2020, and how, as the Institute for Fiscal Studies says, it has been the most remarkable decade in any of our lifetimes, because it has been a time of absolute stagnation where pay has not risen. That hasn't happened, actually, says the IFS, since Napoleonic times. It's been a really hard, rugged time when public services have been cut to the bone in ways that I think people are really now beginning to see, not just the health service, but everything else.
Simon, you've got a new book coming out later in the year. We'll have a little word about that, or are we allowed to mention that? Is it under embargo?
You're allowed to mention it's coming out, but I can't tell you what's in it.
You can't, can you tell us what it's about?
It's the first volume of 3 volumes of the diaries of Sir Henry Chips Channon, which came out in a heavily abridged form in 1967, and the ones I'm doing are complete, unexpurgated, and incredibly amusing.
And there's a lot of expurgation, isn't there?
There was a lot of expurgation. The expurgation has now been unexpurgated or disexpurgated. But that's out in September.
Marvellous. Either of you two got a book out? No,
don't do books.
Not yet. Shall we go to our first caller then? It's Philip in Windsor, not that one. Hello, Philip. I think I've made that joke
Good
before.
evening, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask? Go on.
It's regarding the crisis, obviously, but all hospitals will have in place major incident plans. But what's coming down the line is probably a major incident. And I'd just like to get the panel's view on how are we as a nation going to sustain 3 to 6 months of this with an NHS that is already struggling on a day-by-day basis? What planning is going on?
Why do you think it will be 3 to 6 months of this? Because a lot of people will say you're scaremongering.
I'm preparing for the worst, and it's what I've heard a few people suggest as the likely lifespan. Let's assume 3 months is an optimistic lifespan for the crisis, potentially running out to 6. That's what I've heard a few people on your show say.
OK, all right, Philip, thanks for the question. Former Health Minister Steve Brine.
Yeah, former Public Health Minister as well. So, I've dealt with a few of these. There are lots of outbreaks during a year, and they come across your desk as a Public Health Minister all the time. And some of them are pretty minor, and some of them, like this, potentially are pretty large. So I was thinking about this when this kicked off. If I'd still been in office, what would I have done differently to what Matt Hancock and my successor are doing now? I don't think there's a lot that I would have done differently, because, the first part of the strategy is to contain, and then delay, and then research and mitigate. They're the 4 pillars, if you like, that the Secretary of State set out last week and the Prime Minister repeated this week. What's the alternative to contain? To not contain? The logic is right in what they're saying, and we have some of the best public health measures in the world. Public Health England, I found, utterly professional to work with. Chris Whitty was the deputy CMO when I was in office, and obviously is now the CMO. And the temptation here is for ministers to grandstand and try and have a good war. The temptation here is for the media to sensationalise, and the temptation for the public is to panic. And none of those three things have happened yet. And I think the key to that has been good information. And I think the media have been very responsible because they've also been given good information. And ministers have basically followed the science and followed the evidence. And ministers are not epidemiologists. Professor Chris Whitty, the CMO, is one of the best that I've come across. So you don't try and second guess the experts. You follow the evidence. And when even Donald Trump is apparently following the experts on this one.
I thought you'd say when even Dominic Cummings is.
Well, he is, because that is the government strategy, of which he is obviously a part of number 10. So I think those three things are in place, and we can talk about it in more detail, but I actually do think the government is doing the right thing, and I do think Matt Hancock has handled this very responsibly, and we are trying to contain the virus at the moment. But is it going to get worse before it gets better? In my opinion and my experience, yes.
Fiona Mactaggart, you were a Home Office Minister in the Blair government. When you look at the government's response to this, do you think there's anything that they could have done differently? And do you agree with Philip's analysis that we could be facing a 3 to 6 month real crisis?
I'm not an expert, so I don't know if it's, a week or 10 months. But the thing that I've felt has, in an extraordinary way, worked well for the government is the fact that the government decided that it wasn't going to appear on lots of programmes. It wasn't going to go on the BBC first thing in the morning. It wasn't going to appear on as a result of which it's been Chris Whitty who's been doing the talking. And for a government which says it doesn't, experts aren't to be trusted, wasn't it Michael Gove who once said that? Actually, what's been helpful and that the public have felt reassured by is the fact that it's been the experts, not the politicians, who are telling us what's going on. And it's only at the last moment.
Matt Hancock has gone on these programmes.
No, he has begun to, but it's only at the last moment that we've had Boris saying things in Parliament, actually, calling Cobra, which one would have expected that to have happened before.
Cobra has been happening regularly, and Matt has been chairing it. And I don't think there's anything wrong in a Prime Minister that trusts his cabinet. But I would correct you in the sense that ministers have always, in the past, would have been on the airwaves talking about this themselves. I can tell you now that as a public health minister, I deferred regularly on media slots, which is not easy for ministers to want to give up, as you well remember.
Particularly you, Steve.
Particularly me, Ian. What are you saying? I regularly deferred to the experts from public health. So when we had the problem over the breast screening problem that we had a couple of years ago, I could have gone on the media, but I'm no expert in breast screening.
Yeah, but come on, you know that people don't want to hear you as a male health minister talking about our bosoms. I mean, you've got the judgment. You might be a Conservative MP, but you're not stupid. You get that.
That's the best compliment you're going to get.
That would really make women feel uneasy, uncomfortable.
Right, let's go to.
It's often the experts.
Let's go to Simon. Do you think that the risks of this are being exaggerated in any way? Whenever we cover it on this station, people say, "Oh, well, you're just whipping it up by talking about it."
I simply don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist. What I do know is that if large numbers of people start to die, and by large numbers of people I mean more than the 50,000 or so who die every winter in a flu outbreak because they are elderly or have a respiratory problem, if it gets to much more than that, then I'm sure that this government, which seems to have no compunction about changing its public spending aims from one day to the next, will suddenly find a great deal of money to put into the National Health Service to avoid a catastrophe. Because it could be, if things got that bad, it could be the sort of catastrophe that even 4.5 years up prevents them from winning a general election, because people have long memories, particularly if one of those memories is a loved one who dies of this because of an inadequate health service. But I think what is dangerous is people going around saying, it's going to last 3 to 6 months. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And, the last book I wrote was A History of the Great War, which had a large section on the Spanish flu of 1918, when 225,000 people in this country died in about 8 months. And it was at the end of a long war. People were worn down. They were very undernourished. There wasn't much food rationing, but people were much poorer. There was no public health infrastructure of the sort we have today. There was no National Health Service. There was no, quite primitive medicine by comparison with what we have today. And 225,000 people died. I would have thought, given all the advantages we have today, this is going to have to be a very, very virulent and unpleasant virus indeed to kill as many as that.
Polly Toynbee.
Well, I think this is going to stress test the system in a remarkable way. It won't just be the NHS, and we already know we go into this. We hope not too bad, but, it's certainly going to be a major event. We're going into this with 100,000 too few doctors and nurses, just to start with. We're going into it with fewer intensive care beds to deal with serious respiratory problems than any other comparable country, European country. We're going into it with social care in a crisis. I mean, what happens if, to put it, it's low. The government's lowest estimate is that possibly 1 in 5 people might be out of action for a few weeks because they'd be sick. What happens when there's nobody there, not nearly enough people there to look after old people in old people's homes? What happens when the carers who go do domiciliary care
We had
go
a
and
call
look
on
after
exactly that last night.
go and look after old people at home? Can't do it. Somebody has to go there. There are agencies, but they can't suddenly discover enormous numbers of new carers to step in an emergency. We are going to find how thin, how frail the public sector has become. We have a smaller proportion of people working in the public sector than any time since the last war. Call in the army, they say the army is smaller than it's ever been. It's shrunk considerably in the last decade. Call in the police, they say, well, they've shrunk too. Call in public health, brilliant public health advisors, as Steve said, couldn't be better than the chief medical officer. But when it comes to it, public health is the responsibility of local government. They've had between a third and a half of their funds removed, many fewer staff. They haven't got the feet on the ground to step in and do what needs being done. We saw that at Grenfell, how Kensington and Chelsea, which is a reasonably well-run council, simply could not cope with that one crisis of how do you rehouse all those people? How do you deal with that? They had to bring in a whole lot of other people from outside to do it. But every single local authority will be under that stress without there being a whole lot of others they can call in to fill the gaps. We really will find out how thin our public services have become. That's what austerity has done. A lot of these are unseen services. You don't notice most of the time. The danger is, if this is bad, that we will really notice it.
Steve Brine, it's difficult to argue with a lot of that, isn't it?
Polly Toynbee. I would have expected Polly to say all that. I think Polly Toynbee just argued for a bigger army. The NHS has had record investments since 2010 and is having another massive increase in record investments. Let's just deal with facts. But look,
that's not a fact. Can we just say that's not a fact? Because you're talking about actual sum of money.
Actually,
the increase that the NHS has had over 10 years, each year about 1%, is lower than it's ever had since 1948.
Well, thank goodness we didn't stick to the advice Ed Miliband gave us on the money to give the NHS. But this is a public health emergency. I'm sorry if it's going to turn into a party political argument, but look, nobody knows where this is going to go. Simon's dead right. We don't know if contain is going to work. As the chief medical officer said this morning, if it does spread wildly in this country, then you are going to, in his words, you'll see a radical reshaping of the NHS in order to cope. And yes, there will be compromises. So routine surgery would have to be cancelled.
When you hear rumours, and I'd be interested to hear what Fiona says about this, when you hear rumours that the police will be told not to investigate murders because they'll have to be spending all of their time helping in other areas, that's deeply worrying, isn't it?
It is worrying. And I think one of the things that we're talking in terms of the services which are going to help people is we're not actually thinking enough about what will happen to people who won't be able to go into work. It's all very well the government saying they will get statutory sick pay from day one. But actually statutory sick pay is £94 a week. That is about a quarter of the rent for a one-bedroom place in London. And so if you're just thinking, if what your money means is you're stuck at home, you're feeling ill, and you can't afford to pay your bills, your very basic bills, let alone get any food, I think that will create a whole new sense of crisis,
I think
which
that's
is
right.
really
and
worrying
remember that statutory sick pay is, of course, not available to huge parts of the working
Exactly,
population.
who are on the gig economy.
So when the Prime Minister said that today at PMQs, I think that the obvious question to come back was, what about?
Exactly.
What about the rest? There's people are self-employed, people on 0-hour contracts.
We're talking a lot about the power of the state, the ability of the state to step in. But Simon Heffer, it is also up to us as individuals to try and minimise risk, isn't it?
Of course. I mean, no one should be ludicrous about this. In 1918, to go back to that, there was a war on, and they were very worried that people wouldn't be going into munitions factories. We were just about to get the Germans on the run and win the Great War. And if people hadn't kept calm and carried on, which many of them did, women especially, who were working in munitions factories, a lot of them just shrugged it off and went back to work. And we're not in that sort of crisis now, and people can take precautions. But there's one thing that Polly said, which I really agree with, which is that we should, it is that we should really use this crisis to start doing some long-term thinking. We have an ageing population. I think there's going to be 3 times as many people over the age of 80 in 20 years' time compared with now, and we're simply not training enough doctors. And if this is a wake-up call to us about how much our body of doctors has shrunk, because I know that there are bright young people with 4 A-levels every year who want to get into medical school and can't because there aren't enough places. That is scandalous.
I think with Polly and Simon in agreement, it's time we should go to a break. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Oh, hello there. My name's Worcester. Now, as a cat, I'm a bit of an expert when it comes to warmth. So imagine how cat-a-hoop I was to find out my humans had installed a new Worcester Bosch Green Star 8000 style boiler. Not only does it look perfect, it comes with a 12-year guarantee and is consistently rated excellent on Trustpilot. It really is the cat's whiskers. To be as warm as Worcester, search worcesterbosch.co.uk.
Discover Ireland's wild Atlantic way with Aer Lingus. Fly London to the west of Ireland from $32.99 each way as part of a return trip. Enjoy breathtaking scenery, taste fresh seafood, and explore wild coastal walks. Smart enjoys a short break in Ireland. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Offer subject to conditions and availability.
This is the sound of a Halifax customer who used to worry he wasn't saving enough, but is now saving the change every time he hops on a bus. Switch on Save the Change, and when you use your Halifax Visa debit card, we'll round up to the nearest pound and put the difference into your chosen Halifax savings account.
Proper supporters. You can't beat them. But just imagine if your business had the same kind of support as your team. The government is helping businesses all over the country with support for financing, support for innovation, support for exporting, and support for leadership training. And we're not talking part-time supporters either. Move your business up a league. Go to businesssupport.gov.uk.
Can I have chemo at home?
It's only suitable for a couple of types of cancer.
It depends on the type of treatment.
You'll have to go to a doctor.
When you search one question about cancer, you end up with millions of results which contradict each other. For clear and uncomplicated information, come to Cancer Research UK. Visit us online or give us a call on 0808 800 40 40. Cancer Research UK. Together, we will beat cancer.
Want an easier way to run your business and take payments? You want Square. Whatever your business, sync it all together seamlessly with Square's integrated point-of-sale software, hardware and e-commerce tools to make sure everything's square at the end of the month. Square is there whether you're taking payments for Square meals or Square extensions, squaring off your account, squaring up with your supplier, trading in Cathedral Square or invoicing clients in Leicester Square. With no long-term contracts, no wonder millions of businesses around the globe have gone Square. Visit square.com/UK to learn more. And go Square. Authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority for the provision of payment services.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
22 minutes past 8. With me in the studio on our cross-question panel, Simon Heffer, Polly Toynbee, Fiona Mactaggart and Steve Brine. Sean is in concert. Sean, what's your question, please?
Mate,
hello,
how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
All right. The panel there, do you think Paddy Patel should resign, and or is it just going to be another cover-up by another bent government?
Oh, that's quite restrained for you, Sean.
I know it is,
By the way, Sean, have you seen that someone's done an animated video of one of your previous calls to me? Just go on my YouTube channel because you feature on it. Simon Heffer.
I've got this alarmingly old-fashioned view that in this country you are innocent till proved guilty. So I think there's certainly a case for a very serious and I hope very independent inquiry into her behaviour. And if it turns out that she has behaved badly towards her civil servants, not just in the Home Office but in other departments she's been in, then I'm in no doubt that she should leave her job.
Do you think that this has developed into just a sort of left-right thing where you had all sorts of people on the left defending John Bercow for the allegations against him, Margaret Beckett being one of them, saying, oh, it's just a little thing compared to Brexit, and everyone on the right wanted to get rid of him. And now, of course, on this, it's complete role reversal.
Well, I don't know. I think that if there are unpleasant people in politics who behave badly, whatever their politics, they should be held to account for it. And, I mean, God knows we need, with a government, frankly, as amateur as this one is, we need a decent civil service. I make no claims for the Mandarin who resigned the other day. He may be the worst one in the history of the Home Office, for all I know. But we don't want to deter people from joining the civil service, people of talent, and we don't want to encourage people of talent in the civil service to resign from it. So if a minister is bullying or is offensive or fails to treat civil servants with the respect that they should command, then if that is proved, I don't think they should be serving in government.
Fiona Mactaggart, who was your boss at the Home Office when you were there?
David Blunkett and Charles Clarke.
We see neither of them as sort of shy, retiring violets. I can imagine them having a bit of a shout if they didn't get their own way.
Yes,
I
but
could
they
imagine you having a
respected
bit of
their
a shout
colleagues.
if you didn't get your own way.
They respected their colleagues, and that's an important thing. I think the thing about Priti Patel is that she actually has form for going off-piste in a completely irresponsible way. Let's not forget that she was sacked by Theresa May for making a sort of private international relationship while she was on holiday in Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu. And so I think that it's quite possible, and while I agree with Simon that you need to wait until something has been properly investigated, I think it's quite possible that she has behaved in a way which is out of order, basically. I can understand that working with Home Office civil servants can be very frustrating, particularly because the Home Office finds it completely impossible to devise an immigration policy and do what it has said it is going to do. What I'm afraid frontline civil servants tend to do in the Home Office is they hear from ministers the presence of one more immigrant is a complete disaster, and so that's what they work on, and they ignore the details of the policy, as a result of which we get things like the Windrush scandal. And I think it's quite possible that Mr. Rutnam, who was in charge during that, is not a brilliant civil servant. I don't know. But I also think it's certain that Priti Patel's behaviour is almost certainly out of order.
Okay.
And one of the things that a government minister should do, you've got to carry the burden, but you actually got to treat civil servants who are doing their best to do what the government intends. You have to treat them properly, like anyone does at work.
Polly?
Well, I think there's a culture of bullying going right through this government. When you hear the stories about Dominic Cummings,
Labour Party?
I think, well, I mean, no doubt as well. But I mean, I think when you look at the stories, I mean, it's Tim Shipman of the Sunday Times who produces hair-raising stories, which are never denied, of unbelievable bullying by Dominic Cummings of all of those young advisors. He actually had one frog marched out of the door, to the humiliation of Sajid Javid, who finally couldn't take it anymore. But I think when you have somebody who thinks that it's all right to treat people like that, to shout at them, to call them idiots and fools, to belittle them, that kind of runs all the way through, if that's acceptable. I mean, if Priti Patel has done the thing and said the things she said to have said, and is allowed to stay, it will again confirm the idea that it's okay to behave like that. This is kind of internet culture that has seeped into government. Okay, I mean, you know, Labour no doubt had its bullies now and then, and we've had, you know, the thick of it and all of that. But I think this is of a different dimension, and the danger is it becomes the permanent default position.
Steve Brine.
So I'm with Simon. I take a old-fashioned view too that somebody is innocent till proven guilty. I entered Parliament with Pretty in 2010. You know her well, Ian, as do I. I've never worked directly with her in a government department, so I don't know how she treats her private office. But when you have Priti Patel and Amber Rudd, I think it's fair to say are not exactly on exactly the same sides of my party, in agreement, not thinking the highest of the former permanent secretary, then potentially there's some truth in that, isn't there?
But
it does need to be.
I might not think the highest of some of my colleagues, but would I bawl them out and humiliate them?
That is different. And that's what...
Obviously all my colleagues are wonderful, by the way, just to put that on the record.
That is why you need a properly independent inquiry, which is going to happen, and will presumably tell the Prime Minister whether there has been a breach of the ministerial code, and then he, as the guardian of the ministerial code, will have to make a decision. They're not going to publish the results of this inquiry, though, are they? Well, them's the rules. But just picking up on one thing that Fiona said about, the civil service generally want to implement the wishes of ministers, they do. And I found that without question in my department. But I was looking in Telegraph, Simon, and Blunkett's biographer was writing about this issue the other day. And he said that Blunkett said in his biography that about the DNA of the civil servants, and the department's problems are in the DNA of the civil servants. They had a policy of their own. I've never experienced anything quite like the first few months here. We were running parallel policies. There were my policies, and there was what officials called Home Office policy, and that was what they worked to. I had to say to them over and over again, there's only one policy, and it's what we say it is. So, if David Blunkett expressed that view, then I can well imagine that has led to frustration for other Home Secretaries and for Priti as well.
Frustration doesn't give you the licence to behave in the way that it is alleged that Priti has behaved.
So to conclude my point, that is why there's an independent inquiry looking into her behaviour, and I don't know what that's going to find. But I think the bigger problem for her, if I may say, is probably the tribunal, which the former permanent secretary seems intent on pursuing, which could drag out...
I'll lay you a bet that doesn't happen.
Well, this is unprecedented.
But it could drag out into the summer, and that is very, very difficult.
I think it will happen, because the extraordinary thing is...
I can't see why it won't.
We've never known before somebody resign like that, to refuse to sign a non-disclosure agreement, to refuse to take the money offered, to refuse to go quietly. He said because he wished to protect his colleagues in the civil service from being treated in this kind of way. He wants his day in court. But I can't see that he's going to walk away now.
Do you not think it might be because the maximum payout that any government department can make in these circumstances now is £95,000, and he might have thought, well, that's not enough.
Well,
I don't
poor
think
chap.
so.
How's he going to survive?
Look at how he's put his reputation on the line. I mean, he's done something very brave, foolhardy perhaps. He may not come out of it at all well himself, because other people, Amber Rudd has said herself, others may come forward and start accusing him of behaving badly or being inefficient or inadequate in some way. He won't have a very nice time of it. But he seems to think that there are times when civil servants should speak out. And I must say, I think there are times in the last, many years when there should have been more bravery from senior civil servants who should have said no, Minister, more often on a number of occasions. I mean, I might say Labour's PFIs or the Iraq War. I would say in the Tory sphere, time and again, no, Minister, we said universal credit wouldn't work if you do it this way. Sure enough, it hasn't worked. One thing after another. No, Mr. Grayling, probation will fall apart if you privatise it.
I think that's probably your best example.
Ian, where Fiona's
so far. Very quickly, Steve.
Where Fiona's spot on is that you do nothing excuses behaviour. And I was thinking about my time in private office. What would my former private office have said about me? Probably would have said Steve could be difficult. Steve could be challenging. I was challenging with them. I was very direct with them, and I had to be. But I always think in this game it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And if you can't do that, then maybe you should look at yourself in the mirror. But let's somebody's innocent till they're proven guilty. That's why there's an inquiry.
Right, we will take more questions on different subjects for the next half an hour with our panel. Simon Heffer, Polly Toynbee, Fiona Mactaggart and Steve Brine. And don't forget, you can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. It's 8:32. Let's get the latest LBC News headlines from Caroline Rundell.
The UK has recorded its biggest daily increase in coronavirus diagnosis. 87 have been confirmed, which is up from 51 yesterday. The US billionaire Michael Bloomberg has ended his bid for the Democratic presidential nomination. The former New York City mayor is now endorsing Joe Biden. Barclays has confirmed plans to bring workers closer together at its site in Glasgow, Greater Manchester and Northampton. It says it'll involve the loss of 250 jobs. LBC weather, frost and fog for large parts of the UK. Further south, there'll be cloudy and damp with a low of -3.
The coronavirus outbreak from every angle. What we know, what we don't yet know.
For expert analysis and all the latest information, stay with LBC.
Standard. Stagnant. Same old, same old. That's not how you describe London. We're, well, different. London loves bright new ideas, embraces vibrant, evolving communities, and isn't afraid of standing out. We deserve an energy company that's as different as we are, one that's fair and affordable for all Londoners. London Power, a different kind of energy company.
Want an easier way to run your business and take payments? You want Square. Whatever your business, sync it all together seamlessly with Square's integrated point-of-sale software, hardware and e-commerce tools to make sure everything's square at the end of the month. Square is there whether you're taking payments for Square meals or Square extensions, squaring off your account, squaring up with your supplier, trading in Cathedral Square or invoicing clients in Leicester Square. With no long-term contracts, no wonder millions of businesses around the globe have gone Square. Visit square.com/UK to learn more. And go Square. Authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority for the provision of payment services.
Sheila from Birkdale writes, I arrived at yours with such excitement. You looked and smelled phenomenal. We drove to the beach. We found a secluded spot and then after 5 minutes, you were all gone. Your 2 juicy patties, crisp lettuce, onions, cheese and Big Mac sauce. Finished.
You can now spend even longer with the taste you love with the Grand Big Mac, but only until the 24th of March. Served after 11 a.m, subject to availability, participating restaurants only.
Teaching shapes lives. Becoming a teacher means a career of opportunities. You could head a subject department or work towards school leadership. And with a minimum starting salary of £24,000 to £30,000, teaching has never been so rewarding. Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. Search Get Into Teaching. Starting salary dependent on location.
When travelling from central London to the heart of Edinburgh, what's best? A plane or an LNER train? Well, there's a massive queue at the airport, so 1-0 trains. Free Wi-Fi on board? 2-0. Oh, and travelling with us is on average £35 cheaper than flying. Hat trick. It looks like the LNER train is the winner. So, book direct and find out more at lner.co.uk/air savings. Savings based on cheapest available fares.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 25 to 9. Right, let's go to our next caller on Cross Question. David is in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi.
My question is about austerity. I'd like the panel to explain to me, as a ordinary citizen, austerity to me is supposed to mean a period where you basically endure hardships to pay down your debt and reduce your deficit spending. And yet in the last 10 years, while we've had stagnation in real wages, I think they're still just getting back to the level they were in 2008 before the recession. Our national debt has gone from £1 trillion to £2 trillion, if you include PPI spending as well. And that is costing us £50 billion a year in interest. It's going up in smoke, which would be very useful now given the problems in the health service and the crisis in social care. So why has our debt increased during a period of austerity, and why are we still running a budget deficit when George Osborne promised to eliminate it by 2015?
Well, very interesting question. Let's go to the author of this new book, The Lost Decade, 2010 to 2020, and What Lies Ahead for Britain. Polly Toynbee, David's saying, well, we haven't had austerity because we've still got all of this budget deficit and all the rest of it.
Well, the trouble is we had the wrong economic policy. If we had had a Keynesian policy, you would have said, this is the time now after the crash.
But we did, didn't we?
We wouldn't have cut. You would have done the counterintuitive thing. It feels unthrifty. He called it the paradox of thrift. You have to spend when times are bad, you have to spend, after a big crash, you expand the public sector, you spend more on it, and you create more wealth that way.
And create more debt.
And it brings more wealth into... No, you don't. It actually generates more wealth all round and more revenue to the Treasury, and actually reduce debt that way. And then in the good times, when things are going better, you pay down some of that debt. But by having a big cutbacks in everything and shrinking the economy, our economy went from the top of the G7 to the bottom directly as a result of that austerity policy. By doing that, we did ourselves terrible harm, and we increased, ironically, exactly as this caller says, we increased the national debt. We did ourselves harm in every possible way.
I've just finished reading David Cameron's book, and he is completely unrepentant. In fact, he says he wished they'd gone further.
Should have gone further. Exactly what he said.
Well, of course he would, because it was an ideological project.
Yeah.
It was dressed up as we maxed out the credit card, but the real project was to shrink the state, and more severely than Margaret Thatcher had ever done, did things that she wouldn't have dared do in terms of cuts. And they used the excuse of the crash. It was very convincing. People believed it. Yes, we had a crash. They thought it was like household accounts, but it's not.
Steve, Brine, was it ideological from your point of view? You came in 2010, you experienced all of this.
Yeah, I'm a Cameron baby. The idea that we had a golden economic the idea, well, at least I'm not a Boris baby.
There are too many of them, and he doesn't know where to find them.
Anyway,
there's one coming.
Let's move on.
The idea that we had a golden economic legacy in 2010 is for the birds. We came in with a debt crisis. We came in with a country teetering on the edge of being Greece.
As I said,
the idea also that I remember when Ed Miliband and Ed Balls used to make this point in the House when I was a new MP, you don't spend your way out of a debt crisis. What Cameron did say in his biography, that if anything, he thinks that he was too shy, too conservative on the savings programme. But, we chose a sort of supply side recovery. We chose cuts in corp tax, for instance, which then led to businesses creating what is now the jobs miracle. There are more people employed than at any point since I've been on the planet. And, the idea that Cameron and Osborne are ideological right-wingers who came in to shrink the state. I mean, maybe there may be some on the back benches back in 2010, maybe one or two these days, but the idea that is the Tory party of David Cameron, George Osborne, and that I came into Parliament to try and cut the state and create some sort of small state, I think is nonsense.
Fiona Mactaggart, would things have been any different had Gordon Brown won the 2010 election? Obviously, they'd have been a bit different, but I think he would have done similar economic policies.
I'm not sure he would. I mean, Gordon Brown, if you think about it, had an enormous impact internationally during the crisis. He said to everyone, you've got to stabilise your economy, you've got to spend and sort the banks and create trust in your national economy. He did that brilliantly, actually. And I think we should admire him for that. I have other criticisms of Gordon, and I think he would have said, in this period, when partly because of the crisis, there's very low interest rates and so on, this is the point at which you should be borrowing and spending to grow in the way that Folly has described.
That is the policy that this government is now about to follow, isn't it?
Indeed it is, but they're doing it, as far as I can see, because Boris likes people to love him. And not because he's got any kind of theory of the state. It's because he wants to spread his love, as he has done in other ways. He wants to spread his love between the voters and himself.
Oh, Fiona.
Simon Heffer.
I think our debt has increased by about 75% in real terms since 2010, which does suggest there was a bit of Keynesianism going on, and also that no one was trying to make the state smaller, quite the reverse. What no one's mentioned yet is quantitative easing, which I always thought was one of the gravest mistakes made in our economic history. We had to stimulate consumption at some point, and I would have done that very ideologically by cutting all taxes, not just corporation tax. I'd have cut income tax savagely.
We did, of course.
Well, you actually
took millions out of anyway.
Yeah, but the thresholds that the Cameron government inherited were not changed in terms of inflation very much at all over the 6 years the Cameron government was in. I mean, I'm talking about taking millions more people out of tax altogether and cutting the basic rate down to something like 15 pence. And Osborne just wasn't prepared to do this.
But you had to consider, of course, though, that we were in a coalition government scenario, weren't we? So we were not, I agree, I think we probably were too conservative in 2010 on many regards, small c conservative, but we were in a coalition government.
Well, there was a coalition government, and that takes us back to the utter stupidity of Nick Clegg and David Cameron being talked by Gus O'Donnell into the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. Because what the Conservative Party should have sought to do was to try and steady the ship and then have another general election. And I don't think you can blame it all on the Liberal Democrats.
No, I don't.
Osborne was not a great chancellor. I mean, look, he's done very well personally. I mean, if we could all get a job with BlackRock, we'd all be fine. There would be no austerity, but, that was something that's given to very few people.
I don't blame it all on Liberal Democrats, but I do think that when you're putting together the coalition programme for government, it was a negotiation, and frankly, it's a miracle that it happened at all. So it wasn't going to be as radical as you wanted it to be, and I would have wanted it to be.
Absolutely fascinating. You've just confirmed exactly what I said. You would cut income tax. You would have cut income tax, cut all the other taxes. That would have meant having to cut public services even more savagely than the deepest cuts we've ever known. I can't see how that isn't a small state.
I didn't say I wanted to cut all the income taxes. I said I wanted us to have been more radical in 2010. So to give you an example, I think that the prison is the ultimate example of state failure. If you have an issue, if I have an issue with the big state, I have an issue with prison estate, which is a big state. We lock up ridiculous numbers of people in this country. We knock up women who are mostly victims of domestic violence and commit crimes out of that scenario. We lock up a lot of old people. We lock up people with mental health difficulties, and that is a huge part of state failure. We could have been a lot more radical in that, for instance, and we didn't. And I think
Kenneth Clarke tried, and he got fired when he said, "I'm going to do exactly that," and they instantly fired him because when it comes to it, you're the law and order party, and you dare not. That's why Priti Patel will probably keep her job.
I mean, I love revisionist talk, but I mean, Cameron had in his last conference speech talked about return. I think he'd finally come round to some radical criminal justice reform, and then of course the referendum.
I don't think that was why Kenneth Clarke left government.
I don't find your claim that the Liberal Democrats were good negotiators at all convincing. This is the party
I didn't say they were good negotiators.
ran an election campaign against student debt and then consented to a tripling of student fees. I mean, it seems to me that you lot could run railroads through them.
They didn't
I'm not
in
sure
the coalition negotiations. I mean, the Liberal Democrats actually did a fine job in negotiating the coalition deal. I would have thought they got far more ministers than they were actually.
Yeah, they got ministers, but they couldn't change anything.
Well, they destroyed themselves.
Exactly.
Well, they may have destroyed themselves, but they also implemented about 80% of their own manifesto, which is an achievement in itself if you're a minor party in a coalition.
Yeah, this was a party whose absolute unique selling point during the election beforehand was about student fees, and they folded straight away on student fees.
Right,
I don't believe that they were good.
This is the most coverage the Liberal Democrats have had in months.
We have to go to a break in a second, but we have the budget next week. I said just now that I thought that Rishi Sunak is about to adopt Ed Balls' economic policy. Interest rates all-time low, lots more borrowing. Just give me one prediction from each of you, something you think is actually going to be in the budget, or that you'd like to maybe see in the budget, Fiona.
Gosh, I haven't prediction about anything which would be. I suppose the thing I think that would be good to be in it would be to actually put a big chunk of money into early years, to recreate something like the early years policy that we had, Fresh Start and so on.
What I predict will be in the budget is exactly what Dominic Cummings wants to be in the budget. And he hasn't taken me into his confidence.
Another area that Polly might agree with you on.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And it will be very high-vis. Boris status statement projects that he can say, I did this, that ludicrous bridge idea, monstrous bridge. Railways much needed, and he likes that sort of, he likes building things. What he won't do is what Fiona has said, restore Sure Start, which is the best hope of keeping people out of prison in the long run, solving problems for families
Steve?
Early on.
I predict that it will be less of a fireworks than people think or would like to think because of the ongoing crisis, and I think there'll be a lot of decisions will be kicked down the road to the autumn. But Fiona, we are completely in agreement. Not on Sure Start. I don't necessarily think Sure Start is the answer to everyone's problems, but I am one of the things that I want to do this year in Parliament is a big campaign around early years. We have these manifesto commitments around 30 hours free childcare, but the number of providers in the market is going in the wrong direction because for a start, councils are holding on too much of the money, and there is just not enough suppliers in the market to make early years work. And I'd really like to see that happen.
Shouldn't be a market.
And I'd love to see him do something proper and radical around non-domestic rates, i.e. business rates.
This is what I like. Before the last break, it was Polly and Simon in agreement. Before this break, it's Fiona and Steve. What more could you want? It's 8:47.
Leading Britain's conversation, James O'Brien.
You're politicising a pandemic would be the accusation. Because when you ask what is the government doing, that's politicising a pandemic. If the government does less than it could be doing, if the government continues to be absent and inadequate, then blind tribalism in this sort of context could kill.
James O'Brien, Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. This is LBC.
Discover Cork with Aer Lingus when you fly from London from $55.99 each way as part of a return trip. Experience this vibrant city and head to the coast for authentic Irish seafood and stunning scenery. Smart enjoys a short break in Ireland. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at aerlingus.com. Offer subject to conditions and availability.
The thing that I would say to anybody that was thinking about a job in social care is go for it. I'm Georgia. I love social care because you never know what each day will bring. It's emotional sometimes, highs and lows, but no 2 days are the same. I love the work, yeah. It makes me feel really good as a person. We make people smile every day.
If you want to make a difference to your life, care for someone else's, visit everydaysdifferent.com to find jobs in adult social care.
Proper supporters. You can't beat them. But just imagine if your business had the same kind of support as your team. The government is helping businesses all over the country with support for financing, support for innovation, support for exporting, and support for leadership training. And we're not talking part-time supporters either. Move your business up a league. Go to businesssupport.gov.uk.
I'm Peter Jones. Lifting business performance is critical in today's uncertain times. But how do you keep up with changing regulations and rising demands? How do you break free from manual processes to raise productivity? The answer is technology that elevates performance and comes with industry-leading support. Over 1 million UK businesses, including my investment group, trust Sage to manage their finances, operations and people.
Elevate your business today with our free performance review. Visit sage.com/perform.
You switch. You theme park. You log ride. And remember, she's too small for the log ride. You buy ice cream. You win a teddy. You visit the lions. You don't bang on the glass. You promise not to shout again. You buy more ice cream. More people come to us to find their broadband, energy and mobile deal than any other switching site. What you do after, well, it's up to you.
You switch. Broadband, energy, mobiles. More people claim based on share of web traffic. Visit uswitch.com/verify.
Your new neighbour is a musician. His creative peak is at 3 a.m. They're doing roadworks next to your house. A famous teen star moves onto your street. There's always a reason to travel. Fly with Lufthansa's incredible fares around the world to destinations like Nairobi, Cape Town or Johannesburg. Book now on lufthansa.com. Conditions apply.
Say yes to the world. Lufthansa.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes to 9 on LBC. Let's go to Dan. Actually, I'm going to reintroduce the panel because somebody just texted me to say, "Who are these people? I've just come in from dinner." Fiona Fiona Mactaggart is the former Labour MP for Slough. Steve Brine, former Health Minister, Conservative MP for Winchester. Polly Toynbee, Guardian columnist. And Simon Heffer, historian and Telegraph columnist. Let's go to Danielle in Stockport. Hello, Danielle.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me on.
Hi.
Hello. Yes, I wanted to ask what sort of plans would, for example, the lady just mentioned the Sure Start provision. I work with young adults, and I've seen directly how the cuts in social services affected particularly young boys that I work with, who, without any sort of backing, that the charities are really mopping up at the moment, are going to end up criminals, our future criminals, and in the prison system that the gentleman just mentioned. And I would like to see investment in these people who, especially with our barring of people who are earning less than 25,000.
Okay, so Daniel, I have to get to your question because we haven't got a lot of time left.
Sorry. So just so what sort of provision is there going to be there for them in the future? Because at the moment it's not working for them.
So what provision should there be for particularly young adults, Steve Brine?
Provision that gives them hope, provision that allows them to reach their potential, and that comes through. I would suggest that comes through the education system from very early years, right the way through until they leave education, and then a vibrant jobs place that allows people to be apprentices or to take on jobs that they want to take on, and allows them to reach their potential. And if we can't do that, well then what is the point of the education system in this country? I don't think Sure Start is the be all and end all to it. I have some Sure Start centres still in my constituency that are very good, but I don't think they're the be all and end all. I sometimes hear Labour MPs talk about Sure Start as if it was the holy grail. I'm not sure it was.
Let's have short answers from you all, and then we can fit in one more question. Polly.
Well, I think, young adults were the first ones to be cut. The first thing that local authorities cut when they were, the axe was devolved from the centre to local authorities was their youth services, because they're not statutory, they don't have to provide them. And I think, you can't say there's a direct effect, but it certainly hasn't helped the crisis over knife crime, that there are, in lots of areas, virtually no youth workers any longer. There used to be connection services, places for young people to go, people who had some chance of breaking up the gang culture. And I would bring back youth services, certainly.
Simon.
Well, I've got two things. I'm really distressed that in the third decade of the 21st century, so many young men in particular are leaving school unable to read and write, because whenever I talk to anyone concerned with prisons, they talk about levels of recidivism that are mainly among people who can't read and write, and it is disgraceful that young people leave school today and can't read or write.
What do you put that down to?
I don't know whether it's poor standards in the classroom, that there's such large classes that teachers can't concentrate on children who are semi-literate, or whether there's no backing from parents. Just simply sitting down and reading a story to a child of an evening from a very early age, from the age of 3 or 4. It's not just the state's responsibility to do this, but the state has a big responsibility. The second thing I do, we've got sporting bodies in this country, such as the Premier League and the England and Wales Cricket Board, who are awash with money from television rights. And I'd like to see them invest a lot more money in clubs, football clubs, cricket clubs, for both genders, particularly in our inner cities. I remember there used to be something called the Haringey Cricket College in North London, run by the GLC. And there was a brilliant black fast bowler called Norman Cowans who played for Middlesex.
I remember.
And England.
Yeah.
And Norman Cowans went on the record about 1990 and said, if it hadn't been for the Haringey Cricket College, I'd have become a drug dealer like all my friends and ended up in jail. So we should be, these very rich sporting bodies should encourage young men and young women who have nothing to do to go and play soccer in the evenings, to go and play cricket in the evenings. There's no excuse for it. They've got the money is there. It's a question of political will on their part to do it and to make a real contribution to society.
Fiona.
Simon and Polly are right that you can't just put this down to schools. The children who are most disaffected are the ones who don't bother to turn up at school, or else kick off so badly in the classroom they end up in pupil referral units, which actually, interestingly, are kind of boys' schools and are part-time and are often desperately ineffective. Why do they not learn to read? Why? Because we've got a curriculum which suits people of the intellectual approach of Michael Gove, but doesn't suit people who don't think like that. And it seems to me incredibly foolish that government ministers developed a view of the curriculum which matched them rather than was based on research. Simon pointed out that reading to a child makes a real difference. But actually, one of the things that was stopped was teachers in primary schools reading to the kids in the class. Sure. They actually had to go abacus and say to children, and that's what the education minister says, the only way that you can learn to read is through phonics. And actually, it's one way to learn to read. I used to teach children to read, but there are other ways.
Okay.
Or your parents could help you learn to read at
home. A lot of these parents can't themselves read.
Well,
they come from a non-reading background, which was why something like Sure Start or however else you want to reconfigure it, gets hold of families very young, right from the beginning, and helps parents to read.
Exactly. Right, we've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to finish off with a text from Mavis in Plymouth, which reads, with Democratic rivals Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden being 78 and 77 respectively, and President Trump being 73, how would you like to spend your retirement? Now, do answer that, but feel free to also say who you think the Democrats will choose after what happened in Super Tuesday to fight Donald Trump. Simon Heffer.
I can't afford to retire, ever, so I won't. I should be taken out in a coffin, perhaps in one of your studios. I wonder whether they'll draft somebody. I wonder whether they'll draft Mrs. Obama or Mrs. Clinton.
See, I'd vote for her.
I was talking to an American friend the other day who's a Democrat, and she said to me, isn't it disgusting that we've got two geriatric white men taking on another geriatric white man? That's going to be the choice that they've got. So I wonder whether they'll try and draft somebody, either a woman or a person of colour, to go and make the Democratic Party really different from Trump. I mean, at the moment, Trump's going to wipe the floor with either of these.
Polly Toynbee.
It's the most terrible system, isn't it? The Democratic primaries, where they all tear each other to pieces, and by the time somebody gets through, they've been destroyed by their own side. I think Joe Biden will make it through. I hope that Bernie Sanders hasn't damaged him too much on the way. I think he has a reasonable chance of beating Trump. But what do we know? Everything always ends up being surprising. I'm very often wrong.
And how would you like to spend your retirement? I can't actually imagine you retiring.
I'm never retiring. The great thing which we should remember, Simon and I and you, in with some humility as journalists, is that those who write about politics, those who broadcast about politics, we stay forever. The politicians come and go.
You're stuck with us, ladies and gentlemen.
We sit in our crow's nest criticising them. They have to do it, and it's a very difficult job. I prefer to be a journalist than a politician, but I do broadly respect politicians for their willingness to do it.
Even Steve?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Thanks, Polly.
Now, Steve, the electorate didn't retire you at the election, but how would you...
It depends when I retire or when they retire me, but I would like to play golf with my dog one day, and I'd like to teach the next. I'd like to go and do some
golf with your dog? What, so you're guaranteed to win?
Exactly, yeah. He finds the ball. And I think that the exciting youthful energy of Sleepy Joe will get it with his mantra, what do we want? Moderation. And I think Trump will win, whoever gets it.
Fiona.
I retired myself in 2017 because I thought politics was getting broken. But my actual retirement... Sorry?
Any regrets?
None at all. Decision? None at all. I'm much happier outside at the moment. My actual retirement I will spend on the island of Isla, which is the most beautiful place in the world. And in terms of the American election, my lord, isn't this a case for saying that in-party elections should not be conducted in public because people will just try and rip each other apart?
On that high note, that brings us to the end of this edition of Cross Question. You can catch up on all the other Cross Questions on the Cross Question podcast. You're listening to LBC. Thank you to all my panel. It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock.
The number of coronavirus cases across the UK has risen by 36 today to 87. Meanwhile, Italy has taken new measures to combat the outbreak there, including banning fans from sporting events for at least the next month. It means England's Six Nations match